refrain from yabbering because you guys are hearing nonstop hot air. And simply say thank you for what you do. You know, 4 years ago when we launched the Campaign for Senate in Texas, we launched it, we didn't launch it at a press conference. We launched it at a conference called the Bloggers. The bloggers were the first people to know I was running before any network had it. We put out a press release an hour after the call to let the mainstream media know, because frankly, with the democratization of media, you all have the ability to drive a story, and you're much more interested in getting to the facts, getting to the truth, than any of the mainstream media ever is. So I just want to say thank you for speaking up, for speaking the truth. And with that, I'm happy to answer or dodge any questions.
Senator, one of the issues I was hoping would be focused on, or at least brought up today, I write it, my name is Shane Vander, I write at caffeinatedthoughts.com and truthinamericaneducation.com, is the Common Core State Standards. Yes. I think it's an issue that's going to be part of the 2014 campaigns, yes. But nobody's talking about. Why do you think that is?
Look, I am categorically opposed to Common Core, and it has been something I have spoken out against repeatedly. I think today there's just sort of a limited number of topics you can get to, but I agree. I commend you for focusing on it. I think on the grassroots level, people are very focused on it. They don't want the federal government intruding and dictating educational standards in Washington. And I think educational decisions should be at the state level, or even better, the local level, where parents can have direct influence and control over the values, over what is being taught to the kids.
Senator, just to piggyback on that, Kira Davis, Independent Journal Review. School choice is a huge issue right now, and I've written several pieces about, I think the GOP should really go after this issue, civil rights. Yes. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, do you think that this could be an issue that the GOP might want to, I don't know how, like, sexify a little bit? Punch it out there.
I'll leave sexify. We've gotten in trouble when we've gone down that road.
Okay.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for speaking about it. Thank you for focusing on it. School choice, in my view, is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. It is an issue I have been passionately involved in for decades. And I think it is the right thing to do, but I think it also represents a tremendous opportunity. If you look consistently at polls in minority communities, Hispanic communities, and African American communities, education historically over and over again ranks at or near the top. African American parents, Hispanic parents support school choice by 60, 70, 80% margins. And yet one of the two major parties, the Democratic Party, is for the foreseeable future unalterably opposed to choice because their largest single financial donor and army on the ground, the teachers' unions and the union bosses, will not let them support it. Here's the unhappy truth. Democrats are powerfully opposed to choice, and an awful lot of Republicans give it tepid lip service. In the choice movement, which I've been part of for 2 decades, if we get some candidate who stands up and says a sentence about choice, our hearts go pitter-patter. Oh, how wonderful, how wonderful. The only communities where choice programs have been enacted are those communities where you've had leaders that were willing to stand up and bleed and lose their office over it. And I do think we're seeing a new generation of leaders who get it. People like my friend Tim Scott from South Carolina, who understands the issue of school choice.
So appreciate that.
We need to have the urgency, and the urgency of now. I mean, look, there are a generation of kids right now who are being failed in schools. I can tell you just a few weeks ago, we had a rally in Houston for school choice, to launch School Choice Week. We had about 2,000 kids show up, mostly minority kids, rallying at Minute Maid Park. It was a powerful rally. It was actually very interesting because Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee appeared alongside me, which I don't think it's going too far out on a limb to say that's not a pairing that occurs often. Look, I was encouraged. I was very happy that she came out to support that event. I think it is critically important And to any candidate running in the country who wants to speak to the people, I think you should embrace choice energetically, aggressively. School choice has been here since the dawn of time. The rich and middle class have always had it. All it is about is giving kids whose parents don't have the resources the same ability to choose an excellent education as the rich and middle class hold.
Senator, to follow up on that comment, Sharon Botha, voice of a moderate, I want to know more about education. What can you do? I represent women between 40s and the 50s, the moderate voters, the independents.
Yeah.
What can you do for our children? Remember John F. Kennedy, what can you do for our country? Ask, what can you do, sir, for our children?
Well, look, the biggest thing we can do together is stop the government from harming their future. That's something I tried to address this morning in terms of addressing the youth. But listen, addressing the youth is also, as I said this morning, you want to inspire young people, you're also going to inspire women. You're going to inspire their moms who are concerned about the future of their kids. You're going to inspire independence. You're going to inspire people. You're going to inspire men. I mean, it's the same message. For centuries in this country, every generation has given to the next generation a brighter future, greater opportunity. And we are on the verge of potentially being the first generation not to do that. That is an issue that unites. And one of the things President Reagan understood is getting back to free market principles of the Constitution, getting back to economic growth and opportunity, improving the future for our kids and grandkids, is number one, not a terribly conservative idea. Reagan never beat his chest and said, I'm the most conservative man who ever lived. Reagan embraced common sense values that every small town, every small business, every family has understood in this country for centuries. And these values are not 51% wedge issues. We shouldn't be looking for what we can eke out of 51%. Listen, bringing back economic growth and small businesses prospering and jobs so people like my dad, who washed dishes at 50 cents an hour in 1957, to work towards the American dream, those are 70, 80, 90% issues. And so I think that is the most potent thing for our kids, is bringing back economic growth and not saddling them with a crushing debt that is put on them by deadbeat parents and grandparents.
Senator, Greg Campbell to TPNN.com. I was wondering, with the Fast and Furious, Benghazi, NSA, and now Lois Lerner is taking the fifth on the IRS scandal, is this the latest development of just yet another Obama administration shrug off of scandal? I mean, are we ever going to get to the bottom of any of these scandals, do you think?
If it is up to the Eric Holder Justice Department, no. It saddens me to say that a president who campaigned on being the most transparent administration in history has demonstrated the most abuse of power and corruption in history. I don't think I can say it any better than Jonathan Turley, who is a left-leaning constitutional law professor, testified before the House of Representatives, and he said, President Obama has become the embodiment of the imperial presidency. Barack Obama is the president Richard Nixon always wished he could be. Now that is, Jonathan Turley voted for Barack Obama in 2008. That is his indictment. There ought to be, I think, liberals and moderates and anyone who's concerned about rule of law and our constitutional structure ought to be saying the same thing. When you take the abuse of power, let's take the IRS as one example, although each of the examples you laid out, Fast and Furious is an outrage, Benghazi is an outrage. Let's take the IRS as one example of the broader pattern. It was about 9 months ago that the Inspector General of the Department of Treasury concluded the IRS had wrongfully targeted conservative groups, Tea Party groups, pro-Israel groups, pro-life groups. The day that news broke, President Obama publicly said he was outraged, he was angry, and the American people had a right to be angry. And he pledged he would work hand in hand with Congress to get to the bottom of it. Eric Holder said he was outraged. That was 9 months ago. Fast forward 9 months, what's happened? In 9 months, not a single person has been indicted. In 9 months, the victims of the targeting still haven't been interviewed. In 9 months, Lois Lerner has now twice gone before Congress and pleaded the fifth, which is worth reminding everyone, is raising your hands and saying, if I answer your questions, I may implicate myself in criminal conduct. That is a senior government official at the IRS twice pleading the fifth. And most shockingly, we've now discovered that Eric Holder appointed to lead the investigation a major Obama donor who gave over $6,000 to President Obama and the Democrats. This is shameful. And then the president has the temerity to go on Bill O'Reilly and say there's not a smidgen of corruption. Well, when you appoint a political hack and Obama donor to lead the investigation, and you don't interview any of the witnesses, and you don't indict anyone, no one should be surprised that the investigation designed to cover up the wrongdoing has not exposed the wrongdoing. And, you know, a few weeks back, Eric Holder was testifying before the Judiciary Committee, and I very gently asked him a few questions. And in particular, I went through that timeline, and I pointed out attorneys general from both parties have a long tradition of independence, of commitment to the rule of law. So that when serious allegations of abuse of power were raised against Richard Nixon, his Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, appointed Archibald Cox as a special prosecutor to get to the truth and pursue justice. And when serious ethical allegations against Bill Clinton were raised, his Attorney General, Janet Reno, a Democrat, appointed Robert Fisk as an independent counsel. And the question I asked Eric Holder, they said, are you willing to follow the bipartisan tradition of attorneys general going back for decades and demonstrate fidelity of law, appoint a special prosecutor with meaningful independence who at a minimum is not a major Obama donor? And his answer, I'm sorry to say, was very simple. No. I see no reason to lack confidence in this investigation, led by a major Obama donor that hasn't interviewed the victims, that hasn't indicted anyone, that hasn't uncovered anything, and hasn't tried. As I observed at that hearing, would you trust John Mitchell to investigate Richard Nixon? And let me point out to each of you, listen, the mainstream media does not want to cover this. They behave like the palace guards, protecting President Obama. I think they justify it. Well, he's our guy. We agree with what he's trying to do. Maybe he's kind of abused things a little bit. Okay, the monitors in our newsroom were crazy about that. They actually were utterly silent about that. Let me just say as a digression, if I'd gone on Fox News and said the Obama administration is going to send government monitors to the newsrooms across this country, I would have been dismissed as a kook who's worried about black helicopters.
Wacko bird.
A wacko bird. Well, I actually had my tinfoil hat in the car. But, and when the Obama administration does it, the media, like sheep, just bleed along. The IRS is the most feared agency in all of government. Richard Nixon tried to use the IRS to target his political enemies, and actually the IRS refused. They didn't go through with it, and he was rightly excoriated by members of his own party in a bipartisan way for trying to use the IRS as a political bludgeon. The Obama administration not only tried, it succeeded, it continues to do so to this day, and it's trying to codify the rules to make them permanent. And the media is utterly silent, refusing to cover this. If this were Richard Milhouse Nixon, it'd be a front page on every newspaper every single day over and over again. Instead, what do we hear about? There was apparently some traffic in New Jersey. That's the biggest scandal in the history of the country, was a lane on a bridge closed, and not the IRS being used to persecute the citizens. And that's why I say the men and women around this room, y'all matter incredibly, because you can shine a light. And you may feel like, well, gosh, as I'm sitting here blogging, I don't have the resources of the New York Times or of CBS. You just say this. Dan Rand discovered the power of bloggers. You have incredible power to shine light where it needs to be shown.
Senator Mike Miller, Independent Journal Review. Speaking of Chris Christie, this morning he correctly said, in order to implement our policies, we have to win. Your thoughts on whether Republicans can stop running against Republicans in the next two elections?
there is no doubt we have to win, but the Washington conventional wisdom is that the way you win is you stand for nothing. And history has shown that is consistently a losing strategy. It doesn't work. Every time we follow that strategy, we lose. And I mean, let's take congressional elections, and I talked about that this morning. The last 4 congressional elections, 06, 08, 10, and 12. 3 of those 4, 06, 08, and 12, we followed the strategy of stand for nothing, keep your head down, don't rock the boat, just hope and pray somehow you win. And we got walloped in all 3 of them. The only one that was a good election for Republicans, we drew a line in the sand, we stood for principle, we stood against Obamacare, we stood against bankrupting the country. And it wasn't just we won a few seats. It was an historic tidal wave not seen in decades. And what does the Washington consultant class say? Let's go back and do what we did in 06, 08, and 12. Hadn't worked, keeps failing. So to all of these pinheads, and I'm speaking generically, not any pinheads in particular. But Einstein famously said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The Republican Party likes to listen to consultants who ran losing presidential campaigns, advise the party how to go do exactly what they did before, and lose the next one. That is idiocy. I'll tell you, there is nobody who wants Republicans to win a majority in 2014 more than I do, or who wants Republicans to win the White House in 2016 more than I do, because, and it's very simple, if we don't turn this country around now, we are approaching the point of no turning back.
Are we finally finished playing, I'm sorry. Are we finally finished playing whose turn is it next to be elected or not?
You know, I think so. Listen, if you just watch Washington, you would be demoralized and despondent. I am hopeful and optimistic because I'm not looking at the belt. I'm looking at the American people, and everywhere you go, you know, I've many times drawn the analogy to the late 1970s. I think it is eerie, the similarities between now and then. The late 1970s, Jimmy Carter was in the White House. You had the same failed economic policies, out of control spending, taxes, regulation. You had the same economic malaise, the same suffering. You had the same feckless foreign policy that was making the world a more dangerous place. Indeed, we were appeasing Iran then as we are now. And what happened was a grassroots movement of millions of men and women across this country that became the Reagan Revolution. Now, it didn't come from Washington. You know, a lot of folks point to Reagan, and when they're analyzing the Republican Party, they say, well, Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican. And he honored it. He made no personal insults, no personal attacks. But Ronald Reagan primaried a sitting Republican president in 1976. So Reagan didn't mean that when Republicans are failing to stand for principle, you should meekly stand in the corner and say, okay, go ahead and destroy the country. He came within a hair's breadth of beating Gerald Ford. In 1980, virtually all of Washington was opposed to Reagan. They described him, it's worth going back and reading, as a crazy, reckless cowboy, not a team player, doesn't understand. He needs to win elections. Word for word, what you just quoted. Doesn't Reagan understand you need to win elections? What Reagan understood, the way you win elections is you give people a reason to vote. A reason that matters in their life. Because if we run Democrat light, if we run content-less, what happens, as happened in the last 2 cycles, is millions of people stay home, the Democrats get elected. You win elections by saying, there is a better way, it matters for your life, it matters for your kids. Let's get back to the principles that make this country strong.
Senator,
We've got to go.
Senator, have to go very, very quickly. He has a vote back at the
Okay,
station.
all right, so we'll do last question. I'm sorry about that. You can thank Harry Reid for
I agree with Ike tomorrow. What role do you believe millennials should play in these dialogues and in the upcoming election?
I think millennials have to play a critical role. I mean, there's a reason why my entire speech today was devoted to energizing young. Young people have passion and energy. Now, they're inspired by passion and energy as well. Young people, more than anybody, are being harmed by the failed Obama agenda. Young people have the most to gain from getting back to to robust constitutional protections, to reining in the debt, getting back to real economic growth. And one of the keys, and this is also why bloggers are so important. You know, a lot of Republicans run campaigns, almost Soviet-style campaigns, where they have one poobah on top that issues instructions to every minion that go carry it out. Here is your message, you go here, you go there. And it's thoroughly ineffective, and millennials can't stand it. Anyone with sentience can't stand it. The alternative approach, and what I think is so potent, is frankly a free market approach, an approach that empowers people to be their own entrepreneurs. I can tell you in our Senate campaign, the reason we won is we had thousands upon thousands of young people and Tea Party activists and Republican women and business leaders who had ownership. It was their campaign, and there was no one telling them, here's your message, tell so-and-so. It was, I've got to go find 10 people and tell them why it matters for your life. Millennials, what I encourage young people, and I encourage kids in high school, if you can't vote, you know what? You can get on Facebook. You can talk to your friends that can vote. You can come up with some funny way to share why freedom works. And let me give two final examples. Last year, I was invited to speak in New York at the New York State Republican Party annual fundraiser. There were actually three groups of protesters that showed up. One was an immigration protester, a group of protesters that didn't like my views on immigration. Another was a gun control group of protesters that didn't like the fact that I believe in the Second Amendment. And then the third was actually a pro-Second Amendment group of protesters that was ticked off that I was willing to sit down with the New York Republicans who weren't protecting the Second Amendment. So I thought it was funny to get protested on both sides of that issue. But a group of left-wing activists decided to stage a Twitter bomb during that event. And so they encourage leftists across the country at 5:30 p.m. tweet, "You Cruz, you lose." Now, in response to that, conservative and libertarian activists organized a counter Twitter bomb. At the same time, they encourage conservatives and libertarians to tweet "Cruz to victory" as a hashtag. By 6 p.m., Cruz to victory was trending #1 in the United States and #2 worldwide. The lefty hashtag didn't make the top 10. We don't know how it did. And here's the incredible thing about it. We had nothing to do with it. It didn't come from us. We didn't come up with the idea. We didn't push it out. It was organic. And I think the reason why there were a lot of people that felt ownership, we're fighting this together. It's not about some politician in Washington who nobody cares about. It is about freedom in this country. And a final point for millennials and young people. Humor, entrepreneurs, figuring out ways to convey this. Like, for example, one meme we put out that went viral, and I think it explains what this is all about very, very simply. Reaganomics. You start a business in your parents' garage. Obamanomics. You move into your parents' garage. That's what the fight's about. Thank you. God bless you.